Hi. I am very pleased today to introduce Carl Helrich, who is the owner and winemaker of Allegro Winery. The story of Allegro Vineyards in the Brogue began in 1978 by musician brothers John and Tim Couch. And when Tim Couch passed away, Carl and his wife and business partner, Chris Miller, purchased the winery in 2001. Through those early years, Carl handled production while Chris focused on marketing and sales, and they honored the Couch brothers' musical legacy through their label art and their creatively named blends like Forte and Medley. Eventually, Carl and Chris built their home near the vineyard. They hired help for the winery, the vineyard, the retail shops. The property is now part of the York County Agricultural Preservation Program, ensuring its future use. And Allegro is considered one of the top 20 Pennsylvania wine producers, turning out 30,000 gallons, which is 150,000 bottles of wine last year alone. And as has been pointed out, none of those bottles are here today, but you do have the cards on your table. So the wine, beer, and spirits landscape is changing rapidly in Pennsylvania. And while we as consumers are benefiting from new channels and the availability of alcoholic beverages, the local industries are scrambling to find their footing in these new economies as new legislation is enacted. Carl has seen numerous changes in the past 2 decades in the wine industry in Pennsylvania. Everything from continued direct shipping to consumers, as well as grocery stores and convenience stores selling wine direct to consumer. And it looks like the changes are going to keep coming. So to help fill us in and bring us up to speed, I am pleased to welcome, and please help me welcome, Carl Helrich from Allegro.
Good afternoon. Is this working? Yeah, okay, great. All right, thank you very much, Megan, for that wonderful introduction. And I'd like to thank the Rotary Club here for inviting me to come here and speak to you about what's going on here in the Pennsylvania wine landscape. And thank you, Ann Druck, also, who can't be here today, unfortunately, for inviting me to do so. So, as she said, I am, of course, Carl. I'm the owner and the winemaker at Allegro Vineyards. And what I wanted to say is, start off with saying is, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Pennsylvania wines, tell you a little bit about like where we came from and how things have kind of developed, and then tell you a little bit about where we are and how things have changed in the last few years, and then go a little bit deeper into perhaps what the future is going to be like for us going down the road. So, the history of Pennsylvania wine industry is one where it goes way, way back. Just like wine grape growing in the U.S. started back in the 18th century. The first vines, I believe, were planted in Pennsylvania about 1793 over near Philadelphia. They didn't make it because we didn't understand all the pests that were involved in North American grape growing that the Europeans, when they brought their European grapevines over, couldn't deal with. So those vines died out, of course, and people thought, well, the U.S. can't grow grapes. Fast forward for a few more years, and wineries did pop up. Of course, we then encountered Prohibition back in from 1920 to 1933, and that really shaped the entire alcohol landscape, making wine in these parts of the world where it was just a really difficult thing, especially during that specific time period. Most importantly, the creation of the PLCB happened in 1933 for our specific state here. And so wine production was, of course, limited at that point. Alcohol consumption was, of course, limited at that point. And we started to try to figure out how this agricultural product in Pennsylvania, and then this value-added product could perhaps grow to a certain industry level, basically. So none of this really happened to start to take kind of hold in Pennsylvania until about 1968. So that was the passage of the 1968 Limited Farm Winery Act. That allowed wine like us at Allegro to actually come into being, to be legally made commercially. I mean, there was wine made, of course. I mean, you need wine to have most communities going forward. But for us, as a commercial entity, we were not legally allowed to be in existence until 1968. And once that occurred, we started seeing some advancements with things. The first few wineries started, but by 1970, I think there were only about 10 wineries. By about the turn of the century, so 30 years later, we ended up having roughly around 50 wineries at that point. And so that's about the time when I entered the industry, and back in 1998. And things were pretty quaint at the time. You would go out to small wineries, you would see a vineyard that looked kind of like this, which looks interesting, but doesn't look like the most amazing place. It doesn't look like Napa or anything like that, does it? It doesn't. So, so it was a struggling industry. And with only 50 wineries in the space of Pennsylvania, that's not a lot of density. There was no critical mass going forward. There was no way for us to really make a lot of wine and kind of advance ourselves. With industries, there's a certain amount of critical mass that needs to happen for kind of the average consumer to kind of buy into things. It wasn't until like 1976 when there was a famous tasting in California that kind of made California be placed on the map, the world map. That hasn't happened yet in Pennsylvania, so even as of this day. But that's really understandable, just because we're still a very small wine producer in this country. So what did the Pennsylvania landscape look like 20 years ago when I entered it? Small, quaint wineries who did have the right to ship wine and sell wine to consumers. In the last 20 years or so, last 15 years or so, we've seen some significant changes occurring. Early on, we were limited to only produce wines from grapes that were grown in Pennsylvania. And that was very limiting. It was great for the vineyards and stuff, but there weren't that many vineyards. It kind of limited the amount of volume that we could produce. And so back in 2003, we were allowed to produce or purchase in fruit from other local vineyards. I have to be down in Southern York County, down in the Brogue. Anybody been to the Brogue before? Really? Oh, that's my heart good. Yes. Yeah. Most of you probably on the way to the shore. I get it. That's okay. At least you've been through my 45-mile-an-hour speed limit zone. But anyway, so we're down. I'm literally 15 minutes from Maryland. You know, the closest vineyard to me was down in Maryland, and I was not legally allowed to buy fruit from my friend down there, because there was that, state line right there. So in 2003, we were allowed to start doing that, which then, of course, opened up more supply chain markets for us to be able to supply grapes for our products and things like that. So that was an important change. Later on in 2005, direct wine shipping opened up. What people didn't realize is that Pennsylvania wineries were allowed to already do that. It was a Supreme Court ruling in 2005 that said, hey, we can actually do this. We can actually sell. Whoops, hold on, my bad. Okay, we'll let that go. Sorry. We can actually sell wine to consumers directly through the UPS system, the FedEx system, things like that. And so that got us one more channel, which allowed us to then spread our product to another kind of market for us. But more importantly, then, stuff has really started to happen in 2008 when we had this economic downturn. We had this issue with realizing that we were seeing an economic crisis, and that was going to affect every sort of industry. Now, being in the wine industry myself, we knew that we were resistant to all this. It's always been this way. Everybody, if times are good, what do you need? You want to celebrate with some wine or some champagne, right? When times are bad, what do you need? Well, you need to drown your sorrows, right? So it was always a really good thing for us. Except what happened was, in 2008, we realized that we were not recession-proof anywhere. We were now recession-resistant, because the restaurant industry was hit, and the wineries are reliant on the restaurant industry for their products to move out. So that was a really big change for us, is to have that realization. So these were the things like these issues, these ripple effects. The larger economy on the smaller economy was really causing growth issues for small wineries such as mine. So the average wine consumer in Pennsylvania, or in this country, started to change a little bit because of that recession. We did notice that the people started looking local a little more. They started purchasing local products, wanted to have their dollars stay locally. It's really fascinating. These are some numbers from the Wine Market Council. It's interesting to see that 40% of people drink wine. Of course, we all know that women tend to be more wine drinkers than men. That says 56% wine drinkers, I can tell you that women probably control like 95% of wine sales. True, we see this. We see 60% of wine sales in our winery is the woman with her credit card, but there's like another 35% where it's the guy who says, honey, do you want me to get this? So it's about 95% that they control. But we've also seen the wine drinkers changing with ages and generations as well. So millennials currently are this huge generation that's really going to shape what's going to happen forward for us. So what's really going on for us is that we've been able to start to take advantage of different things like social media to help us going. This is a viral photograph that we had to go nuts on the internet for us. But those things are nice, but the real important thing for us was the legislation that happened. So in 2016, there was a passage called Act 39, totally changed the landscape for Pennsylvania wine industry. This is the reason why you're starting to see grocery stores, convenience stores, starting to sell product to go. This is a very clean shift in the dynamic for wine consumers. I'm not sure how many of you folks know that Pennsylvania's liquor control is kind of an anomaly in the U.S. I grew up in Indiana. When I moved here to Pennsylvania, I was so confused. And what it is yes, it's a state control. It was set up in 1933. There's only one other state in the Union that has this. Anybody care to hazard a guess which state it is?
Utah.
Absolutely. When you have 85% Mormon non-drinkers, it doesn't match up with that, that wine drinking demographic. So it definitely changes the outlook of how people perceive an industry and how sales happen in a state when you have a state-controlled system which has unlimited outlets for it. But now with the grocery stores, things have changed. So what Act 39 changed, and it's one really tiny little change that happened, is that it allowed for someone with a restaurant license to get something called a WEP permit, a wine expanded permit. The wine expanded permit allowed someone to buy a bottle of wine at a restaurant and take it home with them unopened. That was the change. And my friend, got a friend of mine, and he and I talk about legal issues a lot, and he said, why would anybody want this? Who's going to go pay $30 for a $10 bottle of wine at a restaurant and take it home with them? And it took us like 10, 15 days to realize, oh, wait a second, this is not for restaurants. This is for other outlets, outlet creations. So what happened at that point is you started to see these auctions coming up where they were selling off these liquor permits, and those permits were going to Giant, Wegmans, Weiss, Sheetz, Rotary, places like that. And all of a sudden it dawned on me they were going to start to pretend like those things are restaurants that can sell alcohol to go. So I'm not sure how many of you folks have ever noticed there's usually like a couple dozen tables and chairs at all the grocery stores. That's because it's technically a restaurant. So next time you're at the local grocery store shopping, stop there, buy yourself a bottle of wine. You can open it there on the table. It's legally allowed. You're more than welcome to do that. I've even heard of people, there's a couple of stores putting slushies in. You'll be able to buy a slushie, sit it on the table and drink it, and then they'll make your grocery shopping experience all that more enjoyable. So the big change, so my friend, I've got a friend at another winery who was actually involved in the internet in the early days. And he likens this change, this seismic shift change in 2016 to kind of the breakup of the telecom industry back in the early 80s. At that point, there's a lot of confusion. There's confusion in the marketplace. There's confusion, from the legislative side of things and also from the judicial side of things, how we're going to interpret all these laws. And so what's really happened, though, is it's exposed the Pennsylvania consumer is really no different than a lot of the other consumers that are out there. Like I said, I grew up in Indiana. I don't see you all purchasing products any differently than I see any other consumer in Pennsylvania or in Indiana purchasing products. Americans are Americans when it comes to purchasing beer and wine. So the bottom line for what we've seen is that we've started to become on the outside looking more like a normal state. For a local wine industry, this has been really fascinating because we've always been able to sell directly to restaurants. Any person out there who's got an R license, we can sell directly to them. We don't have to go through the PLCB to do that. We don't have to go through the distributor to do that. And so what that means is, as a small Pennsylvania winery at one time, I'm now allowed to go ahead and sell directly to giant corporate, bypassing all sorts of things. And as a small winery, I can also then give different discounts that are not mandated by the state. Or I don't have a distributor middleman taking a cut out of everything. So this means two things. This means that as a small winery, I get to have a larger profit margin, but it also means that Giant and Weiss gets a larger profit margin when they purchase local products. So if you ever go to a grocery store and you see a lot of local wine, and you wonder, why is there all this local wine these days? Well, it's partially because there's 300 wineries now in Pennsylvania, but more importantly, our licensees out there, the grocery stores, understand that they make 2.5 times more money selling my product than they do everybody else. And this is a big change for us. And that makes a big change for me because, as Megan said, a couple years ago, we did 30,000 bottles. We're going to produce 50,000 gallons this year, which translates to 250,000 bottles this year. So our growth rate right now is pretty amazing considering that we had been on a much smaller growth rate before that. So for us, being able to sell through these grocery store channels is just blowing everything wide open for us. So this is previously the PLCB. Yes, that is a channel. The PLCB has 650 different stores out there. We sell to about, I think, around 200 of those currently, and we're trying to open up more of those. It's a great channel for a small winery, but it's really not the growth channel for us and going forward. We're eventually going to end up seeing a lot more growth through all the expansions of the R licenses we're seeing. So what's nice too is that this is a historic wine sales graph from 1981 to 2017. You've seen the steady growth that happens. What Pennsylvania didn't reflect in my industry was we didn't see that steady growth until 2016 happened. And once 2016 happened, all of a sudden things flipped on their head. We stopped being this quaint little industry with a small little tasting room out in the middle of a brogue. Now all of a sudden we are a manufacturer who's making a value-added product using local agriculture to produce these products that you all as consumers are purchasing more and more every single day from us. So the exciting thing for us, so there's the grocery stores. You see this a lot. They push the local product all over the place. And like I said, it's because of the profit margin differences that we're seeing. So the cool thing is they're also open to new ideas. Has anybody purchased a wine in a can yet? Oh, it's coming. It's coming. Everybody used to say, oh, wine should never be in a screw cap because I lose the romance. Well, you lose a lot of romance putting in a can too. But it doesn't really matter because you can't take a bottle to the beach, you can't take a bottle in a stadium, you can't take a bottle to a lot of other places. And we've actually found out as an industry that out of all the bottles that we put into wine, using the wine industry, only about 25% gets recycled. About 80 to 90% of all cans gets recycled. So there's a whole reason for us to keep pushing more and more products into cans these days. So ultimately, what this has meant for us is we have a change in basically the way our vineyards look these days. We have a much rosier outlook on things. We can invest more into our vineyards. This is going to help our wine quality, which I know, as having been in our industry for 20 years, we have a bad rap. There have been people making wine in Pennsylvania for longer than I've been alive. And yes, every industry has issues with quality, but what's happening these days is the bar is getting raised because we're starting to see these different channels that we can start selling wine through, which of course makes us more profitable, which then is a nice return on everything for us. So what does the future hold? Here's the interesting thing. So the flip side to all this Act 39 from 2016 expansion of channels is we are now on the radar screen. And these are the guys who have seen us on their radar screen. And they're the ones who are going to start to show up, and they're going to start to do the same thing as what Giant has done, and Weiss and Wegmans and all the other convenience stores. And believe me, they're worried about these guys. Because when they show up, they change everything. And they're going to be purchasing the same licenses as as Giant and Wegmans and Weiss have done as well. The one negative I will talk about here at the end is that the Pennsylvania restaurant industry is now kind of taking a hit. If you are a local restaurateur who wants to start a restaurant, you now are faced with, instead of purchasing a license here in York County for like $160,000 like it was 5 years ago, it's now about $300,000. So you can't really afford to do that so much. So myself and a couple other people have been trying to talk to some legislators of coming up with a new license perhaps for restaurateurs called a PAR license, which would allow for local restaurants who want to use only Pennsylvania products to have their own license for that. Because right now, if you're a young chef who wants to start a restaurant, you can't do it financially anymore. And this would be one way to allow those people to have access to having that. So for me, the outlook is really good. This is our new vineyard we've just planted about 4 years ago. We've been able to invest in vineyards. We're going to have, because we're agriculture, these are long-term things. Vineyards take 5 years to kind of come online. But for us, I'm really, really excited about what's happening in the future, just because there's so much potential. If you think about what happened in the early 80s when the telecom industry was broken up, and the creation of, America Online and all that other stuff, there was a huge potential where everybody saw this real estate out there and thought, I want a piece of that. The same thing's kind of happening here in Pennsylvania because of all these changes that are coming through. And there's still more coming down the pike, which I believe might involve beer distributors and things like that. So it's a very exciting time to be part of industry, and I mean, if you guys want to be involved, I've got plenty of opportunity for you. Thank you very much. And I'm told I can entertain some questions if you'd like. Yes, sir.
So as both a buyer and a grower of grapes, how would you describe the Pennsylvania terroir? What is particularly good for? And is that changing? Have you seen it change? Do you expect it to change with changes in climate?
Good question. So what is this character of Pennsylvania soils, and how does climate maybe change that? Pennsylvania is so big, it's hard to say something specific about Pennsylvania. I will say that south of the Turnpike is where you'll see more, and especially on the eastern half of the state, you'll see more European-style grapes, which you guys are familiar with. The Merlots, the Rieslings, the Chardonnays. That's where we can grow those. When you start to get to colder climates, we tend to grow cold hardy varieties, or we get to Erie and there's more juice varieties. But down here, it's going to be more European grapes. And I just spoke on a panel last week to news media about climate change, and I was the non-scientist there talking about how climate affects me. I will tell you, yes, I mean, we're seeing more heat, but we're seeing also much more freakish weather going on. If you remember 2018, that was a wicked year in agriculture for everybody. It affected our wine quality specifically. And so luckily we now have 20 years under our belt, so we can still make good wine in really adverse conditions. But it's been really, really scary thinking going forward that we're going to have to deal with weather which has such a direct impact on our day-to-day lives here in the wine industry. Yes, sir.
You talked about, so first, I'm originally from Maryland, so I get your confusion about Pennsylvania. You talked about 650 state stores, and you're in 200. Do you have to approach each store as an individual store?
No, actually, yeah, so do you need to approach all 650 stores in the PLCB if you want to be in each one store? Actually, no, it's a literal. We have a Maryland license, and you have to do that in Maryland, have to approach every store in Maryland. Here, the PLCB works out of 3 warehouses, 3 regions. The Scranton warehouse, which does Central Region, the Philadelphia region, which does Philadelphia, and then the Pittsburgh does everything Western. And so each warehouse has about 200 stores associated with it. If you get placed, if you're large enough to handle the orders and there's the demand for your product, which comes down to basically 1 case of wine per SKU, per month, per store. If you can do that, then they will put you in the warehouse. And so that's how and so there's probably about only 15 wineries out of the 300 that can do that in Pennsylvania.
Are you one of them?
Yes, we are one of them. Yes, we ship close to 3,000 cases to the state stores these days. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the purchase of Naylor that happened this year?
Yes, I can. So as a lot of you might have known, Dick Naylor, one of the grandfathers of our industry, passed away last December, and I was approached by them, and so we're currently in the process of finalizing the sale and taking over that property. We are not taking over the brand, so because that's the family wanted to keep the Naylor name for themselves, but we're taking over the property. Yeah, we'll keep the vineyard there at the same time. Yes, ma'am.
Has the cocktails and cans, a new kind of trend of like spiked seltzers been affecting wine sales?
Luckily, they haven't been. Have the seltzers in cans been affecting my wine sales? They have not been affecting mine directly. We have different enough products, but we know that they're out there. I took my two sons to a concert about 3 months ago, and it was crazy to see every person under 30 carrying a White Claw can. It was crazy. White Claw is scaring the Jesus out of every wine and beer producer, mostly beer guys, but that's really scaring people. So yeah, and there's reason to be scared. So, but luckily, as a local person doing certain different products, it only indirectly affects us. So, and there are a couple local producers making those products. Yes, sir.
If I buy a bottle of your wine at Giant, how will the price compare with what I would pay at your retail store?
Good question. How does the price compare? Actually, you will probably save a penny. Yes, because they charge $10.99 and I charge $11 for our least expensive wine. They're making a markup based off the discount we give them. So to give you an idea, most Pennsylvania wineries sell to grocery stores at a 25 to 30% discount off of retail. When the grocery store purchases from the PLCB, purchases a wine from the PLCB, they purchase it at a 10% discount, but in order to renew their license, they have to give back 2% every year. So essentially, the grocery stores are making 8% off of those wines, and they're making 25 to 30% off of local wines. Hence, you can see 2.5 times more profit margin based, for those grocery stores. But you're a consumer, you're going to see the same price. Yes, sir.
So given as these bigger retailers come online as customers and distributors, how do you project your inventory? How do you project going out 5, 6, 10 years when it takes that long to get a vineyard online?
You do this two ways. First off, you have to develop products, that sell, but that you could perhaps produce almost at a moment's notice. And that's really difficult, but we figured out ways to do that because for me, when I was a very small winery, huge capital investment was in equipment, and I learned how to use my equipment 4 or 5 times a year rather than just once a year, and that allowed me then to develop products I could do all year round. And so that's how I'm hopefully going to be able to handle that way. Secondly, you just got to hope that your cash flow survives. Yes, sir.
I'll project. How big is your marketing footprint? Sounds like obviously you're in Pennsylvania. You mentioned you're dealing with Maryland stores.
Yes.
Or are you beyond that?
We currently do have a way to ship wine to about 37 states, but we have a distributor and a license to ship to work with Maryland and mostly Pennsylvania. But Pennsylvania has 8 or 10 million, I can't remember how many million people. There's so many people, and especially right here in this part of Pennsylvania, it's a high density part, and the biggest wine markets in the country are New York City, DC, Baltimore, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Chicago, and Dallas. We've got like 4 or 5 of the biggest wine markets right within like 3 hours of us. So we think about, well, direct shipping would be great. I should ship to California, I should ship here. You know what? I mean, I don't need to work outside of the I-95 corridor ever. Yeah. Yes, sir.
How many acres per gallon of wine, or gallons per acre, however you determine it?
That's actually a very complicated question. I will tell you that if certain grapes you're growing, you could pull upwards of 1,000 to 1,500 gallons per acre, which would be 5,000 to 7,500 bottles per acre. But I will also tell you, related to the climate question, we had such a disastrous year last year and a cold winter that I have 3 acres and we only produced 300 bottles off of 3 acres. So, and half of those those vines actually completely died on us. So that's the flip side to this. I think I have time for one more question. Yes.
I own a movie theater. Even my colleagues in Utah can sell beer and wine.
Yes.
Is there any progress toward different types of licensing for that kind of an operation that's not a restaurant?
Not that I know. Wait,
Help us.
there is. First off, I don't have that kind of pull in Harrisburg. No, but I do know that there's I just saw something 6 months ago that there's a bill that was talking about movie theater legislation if you had more than 100 seats and stuff, I think. So, she's got 20. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. No, but I did see something out there. So it's for community theaters and things. So, but other than that, yeah, you have to either find special permitting or you have to find an R license. So, yeah, great. I'm telling you, I have to go. I'll be around for later for questions if you like.